Yes, doctor.
Yes,
Yes,
doctor.
doctor.
All right, so today it's supposed to be a vertebral column, but we'll start with the lecture that I owe you, Introduction to the Circulatory System and Lymphatic System. Apologies for having to postpone this lecture, but it was beyond my control. Okay, so we'll start with this. Both of these lectures won't take very long. So it's very, I find that the gross lectures are a little bit easier because I think you've also done some of this in your biology classes. Okay, so we're just gonna move to the learning objectives. All right, so you need to be able to describe the function of circulatory system, and you have to differentiate the two types of circulatory system. So if you just know one type, later we'll see what is the other type of circulatory system. Everyone know about the blood system. Okay, but we're looking at the cardiovascular, sorry. We'll be looking at another type of system later. And then describe the basic structural plan of vessels. In the structural plan of vessels, this is a bit of a histology part of the lecture, but we won't dive so deep into it because later in year two, when you're learning in your cardiovascular system, you are also going to learn in a more detailed manner about the histology of your blood vessels. Okay, so I'm just going to touch um, a little bit in general about this. And then you need to be able to explain the term anastomosis and arteries, venae comitatis, and cavernous tissue, and give examples along with it. And then also to talk about what is portal circulation. So, you know, I'm sure some of you have come across the term hepatic portal vein. So, what does portal circulation mean? Right? And then lastly is to talk about the components and function of the lymphatic system, right? So the function of your circulatory system is to transport fluid through the body. Okay, most significantly will be blood, of course, and hence you will be able to transport oxygen and nutrient tissues. Okay, transport carbon dioxide and other metabolic products from tissues. So you'll be able to provide the cells and the tissues of your body with oxygen and take away the carbon dioxide, provide them with nutrient and take away the metabolic products. Okay, help to temperature regulate. All right, so that's why sometimes when you're cold, you can see your hands become very pale. Okay, and when you're feeling very warm, feeling hot, you get flushed. You get redness of your face, your cheeks. Right, so this helps to regulate the temperature of your body and also distribution of molecules such as hormones and cells. This is important in your endocrinology. Okay, also important in the immune system itself. So circulatory system can be divided into two. You can have the cardiovascular system, which everyone knows of. Everyone is quite well versed about cardiovascular system, and we even have a specific course in MBBS whole of MBS curriculum about cardiovascular system. But you also have the lymphatic system, which is less glamorous, but actually equally as important as well. So cardiovascular system, I'm sure everyone will know you have the heart, which is the main pump of the cardiovascular system. And then you also have along coming the transporting the blood from the heart will be the arteries. Okay. And arteries will go to provide oxygen and nutrients via the capillaries. Okay. And then capillaries will then drain back into the vein, which will drain back into the heart, and then it will go round and round because circulatory system and the cardiovascular system. Okay, hold on a second, yeah. Okay, so I will talk about the cardiovascular in general. So we're not going to talk about all the little details that we can see in the heart, but more of the whole general organization of it. So the heart is a muscular organ and it can contract rhythmically. This is how it helps to pump the blood all over the body. You have to receive blood and then pump, receive blood and then pump. So you have to have this rhythmic contraction to be able to do this. Okay, it helps to pump the blood through the circulatory system, and the right and left ventricles will pump the blood to the lungs and the rest of the body, while the right and left atria will receive blood from the body and from the pulmonary vein respectively. Okay, so this is a picture of your heart. Okay, this whole thing is a heart. Obviously, we've cut the anterior portion off, and you can see the internal part of the heart. So the heart is divided by this septum here. This is a septum that divides the left side of the heart from the right side of the heart. And from the left and right, you have also another division, okay? So it divides the left and right half into quarters, okay? So into the quarter of hearts. All right, so you have the right atrium that receives blood from the vena cava, all right, and blood will go into the right ventricle, and right ventricle will go out into the pulmonary artery. Ryan, no? Ryan, no? Okay, into your right ventricle will then pump into the pulmonary artery to go to the lungs. And then from the lungs, it will drain into the pulmonary vein back to the left atrium, going into your left ventricle, and the blood will then come out through the aorta to go to the rest the rest of the body. Okay, so you can see the heart is basically divided into quarters. Okay, you have first into half, so you have the left and right half, and then you divide it further into quarters. So you have a right atrium and a left atrium, and a right ventricle and a left ventricle. So the atrium will receive blood, and the ventricles will contract to pump blood either to the lungs or to the rest of the body. Okay, apologies for that. Someone wanted to join the class. Okay, all right. So these are the chambers of the heart that you can see, and then the vessels. Okay, so coming into the right atrium here is your superior vena cava and your inferior vena cava. And then coming out of your right ventricle here would be your pulmonary artery. Okay, so pulmonary artery is the only artery in your body to carry deoxygenated blood. So this will bring the blood back to the lungs, and then it will drain back into the heart via your pulmonary veins. Okay, so the only vein in your body to carry oxygenated blood into the left atrium and then into the left ventricle and coming out into the aorta. All right. So you can also see this is a posterior view of the heart. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this kind of view, but from posterior you can also see the vessels a little bit more clearly. All right, so that will be mirrored. That's the right side of the heart, left side of the heart. So this here is your vena cava, superior inferior, and then this here is your pulmonary artery going to the lungs, drain back into your pulmonary veins, and then from the left atrium, left ventricle, and then coming out of your aorta. All right. And the heart can also, you can also find valves in between the chambers and also in between the chamber and the vessels. So from the right atrium to the right ventricle, you find the tricuspid valve. So this is tricuspid means it has three cusps. So later on, when you learn your cardiovascular system, you can see that this here is the tricuspid valve, and on the left side here is a bicuspid valve, where you only have two cusps to the valve. Okay, so between the right and right atrium and ventricle, you have the tricuspid valve. Between the left atrium and ventricle, you have what is known as a bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. So both also can be used. Another name for it is the bicuspid valve. All right. And in between the right atrium to the, right ventricle to the pulmonary artery, you have the pulmonary valve. And between the left ventricle to the aorta, you have the aortic valve. All right. So for your cardiovascular system, you actually have two vascular circuits, right? So one circuit here will go from the left ventricle into the systemic vessels and back into your right atrium. So this here is called the systemic circulation. And then you also have a pulmonary circulation that comes from your your right ventricle into the lungs and back into the left atrium. This here is a smaller circuit. This is known as a pulmonary circulation. So you have a systemic circulation and you have a pulmonary circulation. Right. So the systemic circulation is a portion of your cardiovascular system, and the arteries will carry oxygenated blood away from the heart to the rest of the body, to basically everywhere in your body all the way to the tips of your toes, okay, and will return deoxygenated blood through the veins back to the heart, okay, either through the superior vena cava or the inferior vena cava. The pulmonary circulation, meanwhile, the arteries actually will carry the deoxygenated blood to leave the right ventricle via your pulmonary artery to enter the lungs. And at the lungs is where you have gas exchange. So gas exchange will occur, oxygen will transfer in, carbon dioxide will transfer out, and then the pulmonary veins will carry oxygenated blood back to the left atrium. So this here is a little bit different. Okay, the vein will carry the deoxygenated blood, and the vein will carry the oxygenated blood. So it's opposite of what the systemic circulation carries. Okay, so that's your basic pathway of the blood. This is a whole kind of overview to it. So from your coronary sinus, okay, this is just to drain the heart, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, will drain into the right atrium. And remember, the valve that separates the right side of the heart is your tricuspid valve, and then the blood will go into the right ventricle and then come out of your pulmonary valve to enter the pulmonary trunk. Okay, so pulmonary trunk is also known as the pulmonary arteries. Okay, and then the pulmonary artery will go into the pulmonary capillaries to enter the lungs. Okay, so the pulmonary capillaries will be located in the lungs, and then it will then have the gas exchange. So from blue, the blood will turn, well, it doesn't really technically turn from blue to red, but the blood from deoxygenated will become oxygenated, and that will drain into the pulmonary vein and to give it back to the heart, return it back to the heart into the left atrium. Now from the left atrium, you will go through a valve called the bicuspid or the mitral valve, okay, and this will go into the left ventricle. And from the left ventricle, you have this thick wall ventricle that would pump blood all the way to the rest of the body, but it has to go through the aortic valve first before it enters the aorta. And then from the aorta, it will be distributed to everywhere in the body. And then eventually you go into the capillaries, where it will become from red to blue, from oxygenated to deoxygenated, and then eventually you return back into your vena cavas. Okay, so this is the pathway of the blood from the right atrium to from the rest of the body. Uh, someone needs to mute their mic. I'll just mute all. Okay, so I hope you are able to appreciate that. Right, so blood vessels can be divided into three types: arteries, veins, and capillaries, depending on they're different in architecture, they're different in the kind of blood that they carry. Okay, so blood is carried away from the heart is going to be carried by arteries. All right, so away from the heart is arteries, and these are thick wall blood vessels. Okay, and then from arteries, it will become smaller and smaller, and it will be called arterioles. Okay, so from arteries, it will then become arterioles. And arterioles, they are smaller lumen, okay, because you don't have to carry that much blood because you're nearing the tissue. And then they also have a thinner wall compared to your larger arteries. All right, and from the arterioles, it will go into the from the arterioles, it will drain into the capillary. And in the capillary is where oxygen will come out along with nutrients, okay? And the tissues, okay? So you have the tissue, the cells of the whatever tissue you're supplying. The tissue will then give CO2 and also metabolic waste back into the capillaries. So capillaries needs to be very, very, very thin wall. In fact, it has only a single layer of endothelium to the capillaries, okay? And capillary, usually you will be depicted in like a bed, so you have a network of the capillary, and then from the capillary bed you will drain into venules, okay, into venules, and then venules into veins. Okay, so you have a medium-sized vein, and it will become larger to eventually become either of the vena cava, either the superior or inferior. So that is your artery, okay, and then it become arterial, smaller kinds of arteries. Into the capillary bed is where your gas exchange will occur, your metabolite products will be returned back, and nutrients will come out to the cells. drained by the venules back into the vein and eventually to the largest veins, which are your vena cava. So structurally and generally, the wall of the blood vessels, be it artery or veins, can be divided into three coats. Okay, so the name for these coats are all called tunica. So that's why you have like your tunics. Okay, so tunica intima, tunica media, and tunica adventitia. So intima means um, very like closely, very intimate. So it'll be the innermost coat. Okay, the innermost part, innermost layer is the nearest to the blood itself. Okay, so if we were to look at this blood vessel here, this is the lumen. So you can imagine your red blood cell will be inside there. So red blood cell will all be not just red blood cell, of course, red blood cell, white blood cell, as well as your leukocytes, as well as your platelets. Okay, will all be inside the lumen here. And this lumen will be lined by a single layer of endothelium. Okay, so it's an epithelium, but because it's related to the vessel, it has a specific name, which is the endothelium. Okay, so endothelium here is your epithelium for your blood vessel. Okay, so from the endothelium, you have the first layer, which is your tunica intima. So this here is your first layer, your tunica intima. Okay, and then the outer or more superficial than that will be the next layer, which is your tunica media, and then the outermost layer is your tunica adventitia. So tunica intima, innermost, and then the middle layer will be the tunica media, so middle media, and then the outermost will be the tunica adventitia. And the composition of each tunics will be different depending on the type of blood vessel that you have. Okay, so tunica intima, innermost layer, it will consist of a single layer of endothelium. Okay, so this is a kind of epithelium cell, and then you have the subendothelial layer and also the internal elastic membrane or the internal elastic lamina. So, and the endothelium is where the tunica intima will begin, and the internal elastic lamina or internal elastic membrane is where the tunica intima will end. Okay, so anything that is more superficial than this, okay, more on the outer side of this will be the already going to the tunica media. So tunica media will be mostly consist of smooth muscle. Okay, so you have your tunica media there, that's all your smooth muscle. But sometimes you can find fibers as well, be elastic or collagen between these muscle cells. And again, it all depends on the type of vessel that you're talking about. Certain vessels will have a lot of elastic fibers. Certain vessels, you have less of them. So, but in general, they have smooth muscle and they have elastic. They have fibers in between this muscle. All right. And then on the outer side of the smooth muscle layer is where you find your external elastic lamina. And this is the width of your tunica media. Anything outer of your external elastic lamina will be considered as your tunica adventitia. So tunica adventitia is the outermost part, is the outer part of the connective tissue that makes up the coat of your vessel. Okay, so it's principally made up of fibers, be it collagen or elastic. All right, and in large vessels, okay, in big vessels, you can also find small arteries that would supply the walls of the vessel itself. In certain large vessels, you have very thick wall. Okay, so the thick wall needs its own arteries to feed its own blood vessel to help to give oxygen and give nutrients to these cells as well. All right. So again, to recap, you have your tunica intima, okay, innermost from the endothelial layer, and then you have the subendothelial, and then you have the internal elastic lamina. So these are all your tunica intima. Outer of the internal elastic lamina is considered to be tunica media, which is made up of mostly smooth muscle, but you have also fibers as well. And then you have the layer of external elastic lamina. So anything after that, anything outer from that is your tunica adventitia. And tunica adventitia is mostly made up of fibers, but also sometimes in large vessels, you find that they are fed by small arteries called vesa vasorum, the vessel of vessels, okay? The vessel of vessels. This is what vessel vasorum means. All right, so arteries, they carry blood from the heart, okay, and especially if it's coming from your left ventricle, it carries blood with a relatively high pressure. So the further the arteries are from the heart, the less caliber you have. So the smaller the lumen is, and the smaller the wall is, because you don't have to be able to accommodate that much blood anymore. Okay, so the aorta has to accommodate the whole of your cardiac output, which is tremendous. But if you go into arteries that are smaller, they are nearer your finger or your toes, they don't have to be that big. Okay, and the arteries, you have different type of arteries that you can distinguish from each other depending on the size, depending on the muscle that you have in your tunica media. So arteries you can divide into three. Okay, so the easy way to remember is the large, medium, and small. Okay, but another name for it is your elastic arteries is for large arteries, muscular arteries for medium size, and arterioles are your small arteries. Okay, large arteries are the ones that are very, very close to the heart. Okay, from the left ventricle, you have your aorta, which is this big vessel that comes out of your left ventricle. All right. And in large arteries, you have many elastic layers in your walls. Okay. You have many elastic fibers. Okay. The fibers will form the layers, and you can find these fibers in your subendothelial layer and also your tunica media. So why do you have to have this elastic fibers here? Why do you have to have this elasticity to it? Is because when the heart contracts, all right, a lot of blood will go into the vessel. So the vessel, the large arteries will expand. Okay? But when the heart go into diastole, or when it ceases to contract, when the ventricle expands, when the ventricle relax, okay, you don't have that rush of blood anymore. So you can't have the arteries be balloon up and then just stay like that, because then your blood pressure will go down. Okay, so what happens is that is you have a gush of blood coming through, it will expand, and then it will return back to its original size. And then whenever the ventricle contraction occur again, it will expand, and then it will return back to its original size. So this will be able to, for you to maintain the blood pressure within the circulation and maintain the flow of blood throughout. If not, if when the ventricle contracts, the blood pressure, the artery expands and it doesn't contract back, the blood in that area can become a stasis, can become static. Then you don't want that to happen in your circulatory system. You need the blood to always constantly flow in a nice laminar pattern. All right, so that's why you find a lot of these elastic fibers in the layers of the walls of your large arteries. So large arteries included your aorta, the brachiocephalic trunk, which is a branch of your aorta, the subclavian and the carotid arteries, which is also either a branch of your aorta or the brachiocephalic trunk, and then also the pulmonary trunk. So all of these are large arteries. They need a lot of elastic fibers that make up elastic layers in the wall of the blood vessel. All right. Next is your medium arteries. So medium arteries are also known as muscular arteries. Muscular arteries because they have a lot of smooth muscle in the tunica media. So your medium arteries are all your name arteries. If you see here, there's your tunica intima, right? So you have your epithelium, that your endothelium specifically, that will be lining the lumen of your blood vessel. So these are all your endothelium. And you can see underneath that in this layer here, this is subendothelial, and this here is your internal elastic lamina. The first one in blue here is your internal elastic lamina. Okay, and then here is your tunica media. So tunica media here, you can see a lot of smooth muscle. Okay, so this is a lot of smooth muscle in your tunica media of your muscular arteries. Okay, on the right here is actually a depiction of your large arteries. So you can see a lot of elastic fibers here, and on this side you have a lot of smooth muscle. So smooth muscle in your muscular arteries enable for the expansion, and not really expansion, but it enables the arteries to vasodilate or vasoconstrict. Okay, when you have this ability for your blood to regulate its own diameter, you can help to distribute blood throughout the body. Okay, so muscular arteries are all your name arteries, like your brachial artery, the femoral artery, the popliteal artery in your lower limb, or in your upper limb, you have your brachial arteries, your radial artery. So all of these are muscular arteries. Okay, so next is you have your arterioles. So these are your small arteries. The arterioles, it's very, very small. The lumen is small. The thickness of the wall is also quite thin. But in relation to the lumen itself, it has a thick wall. But the wall in relation with your other kinds of arteries, your medium and your larger arteries, are very, very thin. Okay, so the tunica media is entirely made out of smooth muscle. You don't find any fibers in there. And what it does also, it will enable the vessel, the arteriole, to contract or constrict or dilate. And this will allow for the control of blood pressure within the arterial system. Okay, so your the filling of the capillary bed is regulated by the level of contraction of the muscular layer in the arteriole. So if your arterioles are vessel constricted, less blood will go into the capillary bed. If your vessels are vasodilated, then more blood will go into the capillary bed. And if your a lot of your arterioles are all constantly constricted, then you get a very high pressure in your arterial system, and this will result in hypertension. Okay, so arterioles are small arteries that are not named. Right, so you have name arteries that whenever you look at it, you identify it, you can name it. But certain small arteries are not certain. A lot of small arteries, because there's just too numerous of them, you don't name it anymore, and these are all your arterioles. And then we go into capillaries. The capillaries are microscopic blood vessels that form a network. So they connect the arteriole on the arterial side and the venules and the venous side. Okay, and this usually it's very, very short. Okay, and they're very, very thin. The tunica intima is only made up of a single layer of endothelium, and you don't have any tunica media, you don't have any tunica adventitia. And usually in the capillary, the lumen is the size of your red blood cell. All right, because that's the one of the biggest cell. So you only have one red blood cell coming into the lumen at a time. Okay, and you only have one cell layer that would make up the lumen. The wall, which is your endothelium. So a single layer endothelium, no other layers, no tunica media, no tunica adventitia. Function of the capillaries, as mentioned earlier, is to provide a site for nutrients and oxygen to go into the surrounding tissue, and then it will absorb it will absorb waste products, carbon dioxide from the tissue back into the blood supply. Okay, and capillaries do actually have three types depending on the basal lamina. So I'm sure when you learn about epithelium last time, you know the epithelia will always rest on a basal lamina, on a layer of basal lamina. So depending on the basal lamina and also the cells of the endothelium, they can be divided into three. The first is the continuous type of capillary. So this you can find in muscle or in brain tissue. So you can see that the endothelial lining is continuous and the basal lamina also is complete. All right. In fenestrated, okay, the middle picture there, you can find it in pancreas, in thyroid gland, in renal glomeruli. So in fenestrated capillary, you have a certain kind of filtration occurring, or a certain, bigger molecules need to go in and out of the capillaries. All right. So fenestrated capillary, you have fenestrated endothelium, means you have some holes in your endothelium, but the basal lamina is complete. Okay, so this enables for the movement of bigger molecules in and out of the capillary. And then you have what is known as sinusoids. So sinusoids, your both the endothelial lining and the basal lamina are full of holes. So this allows for even bigger movement of molecules across the wall of your capillary. So this you can find in more kind of hematopoietic organs in your liver, in your spleen, right? So three types of capillaries. You have continuous, fenestrated, and sinusoid. Okay, so from arteries into veins, back into from arteries into capillary, back into veins. So veins will transfer low oxygenated blood, except for your pulmonary vein. They will transfer this blood from the capillary bed back to the heart. Okay, so but due to its low oxygen content, the blood in your veins are always darker in color. So if you ever had a venipuncture, if you ever had blood withdrawn from your anterior part of your elbow, the cubital fossa of your upper arm, you find that the blood that they take is a very dark shade of red. Okay, and this is because of low oxygen content. If you ever had blood taken from your artery, okay, this is very seldom unless you're being hospitalized for specific reasons. You need to take blood directly from your artery, which is more difficult to access. And then you find that the blood is of a brighter red in color. So the oxygen actually, the oxygen content gives different hue to the blood. Okay, so the veins, venous walls are thinner, especially in the tunica media, because the pressure in your veins is not as high as the pressure in your arterial system. Okay, remember the one that controls the blood pressure, the arterial blood pressure is in the arterial. So after the arterial, you don't have that high amount of blood pressure. You do have still blood pressure, of course, but it's not as high in the arterial system. And the veins, they don't pulsate, so it's not like arteries where you can actually feel for the pulsation of your blood flow. Okay, like in your radial artery, what you can feel for in your wrist, you can feel it pulsate, you can feel the movement of blood, which reflects the contraction of your heart. Right, but in the veins, the blood, you don't pulsate. And then the type of veins, also you have three. You have the large vein, the medium vein, and the venules. So venules is the smallest of all your veins, just like arterioles is the smallest of all your arteries. Okay. In venules is the smallest vein and it drains the capillary bed. So arteriole will feed the capillary bed and the venules will drain the capillary bed. And the venules will join each other to form small veins. Okay, so the small veins will then drain into larger veins, which drain into venous plexus. Okay, it's not the large veins that we know, but the caliber of the veins will become bigger and bigger and bigger until it forms venous plexus. This is like a network of um, of veins, right? So from the capillary bed, okay, you will then drain into the venules, which drain into small vein, which will drain into larger vein, which will then drain into plexus. Okay, venous plexus. So from the venous plexus, it will drain into what is known as your medium-sized veins. Okay, so medium-sized veins, they drain the venous plexus and they accompany medium arteries. So like your medium arteries, all the name arteries that you find in your body is called the medium artery. Is classified as the medium arteries. All the name veins that you find in your body is classified as the medium veins. So your brachial vein, your cephalic vein, your femoral vein, your saphenous vein, all of the veins that you find have a specific name to it. That means it's big enough to qualify as a medium vein. Okay, and what's important about this medium veins is that it has this flap, okay, these valves inside the vein to allow blood to move from in only one direction. So it will prevent blood to go back, to retrograde, to regurge back in an opposite direction. So if this is, say, your lower limb, okay, so this is your lower limb, that's your feet, okay, the blood needs to move from the distal part of your lower limb into the more proximal part. So it needs to go upwards against gravity. But because for arteries, you have the heart that is constantly pumping the blood in one direction. But for veins, you don't have that kind of pump. Okay, the heart was like very, very far away already. So what you have instead is you have the veins that will go in between muscles. Okay, so the muscles in your body will help to actually return back the blood to go in the opposite direction of the gravity, in the opposite pull of the gravity, and go back to the heart, and not go back in a reverse kind of direction. So that's why movement is always important to prevent any blood clots occurring in your veins. Okay, so that's why first you have the valve that will help you to also not have stasis of blood, but you also have your skeletal muscle to help move or to help nudge the um, flow upwards. Okay, against gravity and towards the heart. That's why you always need to move around and able to ensure that your blood is constantly moving in your venous system. Okay, so that was medium vein, and then you have your large veins. So large veins have a lot of smooth muscles, okay, and a very well developed tunica adventitia to it. That's the kind of characteristic that large veins have. You still have the valve, but then you have a lot of smooth muscle, and also the tunica adventitia is very thick, and you can also find that you have vessels that will be embedded in your tunica adventitia, and this is again the vasa vastorum, the vessels of vessel, the vessels that help to feed the larger vessel. Here, and large veins are an example of your large veins is your like superior vena cava, inferior vena cava is an example of your large veins. So those are the types of vessels that you have, okay, from arteries, large arteries, to medium arteries or muscular arteries, to small arteries, or you call it arterioles, and then capillary bed, and then you go into venules, into medium-sized veins with valves, and into large veins that have smooth muscle and a well-developed tunica adventitia. So this is a whole array of vessels that you have. All right. And now we have to talk about the terms that you usually find when you're talking about your cardiovascular system. So you have anastomosis, and artery, vena comitatus, and cavernous tissue. So these are the terms that you have to know. So what is anastomosis? Anastomosis is the communication between adjacent arteries. So this, when you have an anastomosis, it helps to provide multiple detours for blood flow in case of the main branches become obstructed. Okay? Obstruction either can be due to compression or caused by pathology, or even a compression by a joint position. Okay, so that's why in highly mobile joints, you find that you have a lot of anastomosis uh, uh, around the joint itself, because depending on the position of your joint, you can compress one vessel. So that's why you have another vessel to help to redirect or reroute the blood. Right. So anastomosis, if the main passage is closed, then you have alternative small pathway will be able to accommodate the blood, and usually the small pathway will actually increase in size and proliferate in number. So this is a process that may take some time, okay, but it will help to compensate for the blockage of the main passageway. So you can kind of imagine that you have a main passageway is your big highway. Okay, so if you can imagine that you have this highway where you have like a lot of blood can go through, a lot of car can go through, but sometimes you have either a joint that depending on the joint position, or you have an accident, okay, or some pathological condition that occurs in that pathway, in that highway where it is blocked. So what happens then is that the blood will then reroute to smaller um, vessels, so smaller roads that can take them to the same destination. It's just that they have to take a detour. Okay, and if this detour is permanent, then all these small roads will then, you can build more roads, or you can expand these roads so that it will be able to compensate for the blockage of the main passage. So that's anastomosis. All right, and then arteries. Arteries are arteries that do not anastomose with adjacent arteries. So if you have occlusion of a true artery, that will interrupt the blood supply to the structure or the segment of organ it supplies. So it's actually you have N arteries all over your body, and if you have any problem with that artery, then that's it for that structure. So the N artery that's quite important is to the retina, okay, to the eye, to the back part of the eye. So retina is very important in sight. If you don't have retina, or your retina is this dysfunction, then you're not able to see, right? And the retinal artery there's only one N artery that supplies the retina. So if you have any occlusion to this artery, then we actually result in um, blindness. Okay, so this is a true N artery. Another type of N arteries is a functional N arteries. So functional N arteries are that you actually have anastomosing between arteries, but it's ineffectual. It's not, you can't use it. It's not reliable because the caliber of anastomosis is insufficient to keep the tissue perfused. So say for especially for organs that need a lot of blood supply, like the brain, the liver, the kidney, or even the heart. So these are all very, very important organs that have a very high metabolic activity. So they constantly need a lot of blood supply. Sometimes the arteries that supply this organs, they have anastomosis between each other, but it's just not enough, not big enough, or not significant enough to be considered an anastomosis. Okay, so they're called functional N arteries. So the function itself is not, it reminisces an artery. So this is an example. Okay, so if you have an anastomosis, all right, so this is a structure that each blood vessel will supply. Okay, if you have a blockage here, it's fine because you have an anastomosis. And then blood can be rerouted and can provide enough supply to both areas. So no ischemic necrosis. Okay, but in a functional N artery, this is a functional N artery. Okay, you have actually an anastomosis, but this anastomosis is not enough. Okay, functionally it's not viable. Functionally it doesn't provide any alternative for blood to be rerouted to this area here. So you actually have an ischemic necrosis. And if it's a true N artery, okay, true N artery, you don't have any communication at all. Any occlusion in this area will definitely result in an ischemic necrosis of the area that is supplied by this vessel here. So anastomosis, functional N artery, and a true N artery. All right, next is vena comitatis. So vena comitatis is veins that accompany the deep arteries. Okay, so deep arteries in your body will have veins that accompany it. And this actually, the movement of blood in these vessels will be opposite direction. Okay, so if you have blood in the artery going this way, the blood in your veins will actually go this way. So this vena comitatis, the accompanying veins, will be, sometimes they have multiple in numbers, okay, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, and they actually form a network, okay, they connect between each other to surround the artery. So what happens is that it acts as a counter current heat exchanger. So this acts as a counter current heat exchanger that will warm up the venous blood returning to the heart from cold limbs. So it ensures that the blood that will go back into the heart, into the core of your body, will be warm. Okay, if not, the heart will be there. Your core body temperature can be reduced by the returning of cold blood from your peripheries. All right, and then you have cavernous tissue. Okay, so cavernous tissues are endothelial line blood veil tissue. It's surrounded by smooth muscle. They don't really have a lumen. Okay, they're not like vessels. Okay, but they have this just a parenchyma where you have some connective tissue there. And it's going to be surrounded by smooth muscle. Also, it's going to be lined by endothelium, and it's very characteristic of erectile tissues. Okay, so tissues with erectile functions will have what is known as cavernous tissue. So the most significant of which is what you can find in a male's penis and in the clitoris itself. Okay, so now we move on to portal circulation. So portal in Greek, it means entrance. It means gate. Okay, so in terms of portal circulation, in normal systemic circulation, you have one artery, okay, an arteriole actually that will feed into capillary and then will be drained by one venule. Okay, so this is what a typical systemic capillary would look like, capillary bed. But in portal system, you actually have a portal vein that connects two sets of capillaries. So first you have the arteriole that will feed into the first set of capillaries, and these capillaries will drain into a portal vein. And from the portal vein, it will feed again into another set of capillaries, the second set of capillaries, which will then be drained into the systemic vein, and eventually will go back to the heart. Okay, so this will drain back to the heart, this here will drain back into the heart as well. So in portal system, you have a portal vein that will divide two sets of capillaries, right? So where can you find your portal system? First, you can find it in your hepatic portal venous system. Okay, so hepatic portal venous system is that from the digestive tract, so from your small intestine, from your small and part of your large intestine, you can find that the arteriole will feed into the capillary bed in your digestive tract. And then from the digestive tract, it will drain, venules will drain the blood into the hepatic portal vein. And from the hepatic portal vein, it will actually divide back into a capillary bed in the liver. And then it will drain, this capillary bed will drain into a hepatic vein, which is a proper systemic vein, and will drain back into the systemic circulation. So you actually find that you have a vein, a portal vein that connects two capillary beds before it goes back to the heart. Okay, any questions on the cardiovascular system? If no question, can I move on to the lymphatic system? Okay, so lymphatic system is a network of lymphatic vessels that forms a one-way system that carries lymph towards the heart. Okay, so if you know, I hope you know this, right? If you have a capillary, you have an arteriole, okay, that will fit into the capillary bed, okay, and that will be drained by your vein, venule first, and then eventually into the vein. So in your capillary bed, around the capillary bed is where you have your gas exchange occurs. So all the cells will be located there, okay. So you have movement of oxygen or metabolic products. You know, a lot of it sometimes will be moved in blood in liquid form. So you have liquid that will come out of your capillary bed into the interstitial space. So there you have your, in between here, you have your interstitial space. All right. So from the interstitial space, eventually the fluid will be drained back into the venous system. But that's only 90% of the fluid. Another 10% of the fluid will be left in your interstitial space. So this fluid, especially the excess fluid, will have to go back into the systemic vessel, because if not, you will have what is known as edema. If your interstitial space becomes too filled with fluid, okay, then you can have edema. So that's not what you need in your body. You don't have that kind of, you need a homeostatic system to keep everything in its place. So the lymphatic system will help to return back the excess interstitial fluid back into the systemic circulation. Okay, so they do this by having two components. One is the lymphatic vessels, and one is it actually involved in your immune defense, which are your lymph nodes. Okay, so function of your lymphatic system is to drain excess interstitial fluid back into the systemic vessels. Okay, it also helps to transport dietary lipids from the digestive system. This is important in your digestive area. Okay, and it facilitates immune response, okay, because you have your lymph nodes that will be where you have your lymphocytes, production of antibodies in the area. So these are the three main functions of your lymphatic system. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, from the blood, okay, so from the capillary here, the fluid will go into the interstitial space, and only 90% will be drained back into the systemic venules, into the systemic vein. The 10% will be in the interstitial space, and we have too much of it. The interstitial space will be drained by lymphatic capillaries. So lymphatic vessels here, your lymphatic capillary, they're actually blind and they only absorb um, uh, lymphatics. Okay, so these are blind capillaries that will absorb excess interstitial fluid and will enter the lymphatic capillaries. And from the lymphatic capillary, it will go into lymphatic vessel. So this here is your lymphatic vessel. And the lymph in your lymphatic vessel will go through lymph nodes, will eventually drain back into the lymphatic trunk. Okay, lymphatic trunk is a bigger vessel. Okay, where eventually it will drain into the lymphatic duct and will go back into the circulatory system. Okay, so as it goes back, it will go through all your lymph nodes, which will help to eliminate, if you have any pathogen in the area, it helps to eliminate and take part in the immune system. Right, and before the lymph is returned back, it has to, as I mentioned, go through lymph node, and the lymph nodes that carry lymph, the lymph vessel that carry lymph, the lymph node will have an afferent and an efferent. So afferent will go in the lymph node and efferent lymph will go out of the lymph node. Eventually, all of your efferent lymph vessels will drain into the lymphatic trunk and then drain into the lymphatic duct back to what is known as one of the big duct is called a thoracic duct. Okay, so thoracic duct, you can find it's named thoracic because you can find it in your thoracic cavity. But it actually begins in the abdomen, okay, as what is known as the cisterna chyli. Okay, the cisterna chyli here will then drain into the thoracic duct, which will go all the way up, and then eventually it will drain in the angle between the subclavian vein and your internal jugular vein. Okay, this junction here. So it will drain all the lymph from your abdomen, from your lower limb and your abdomen to go upwards, and then all the thoracic lymph will also drain into here, and eventually it will go back into the systemic circulation at the junction where the subclavian vein and the internal jugular vein meets. So it receives lymph from lower limbs, the pelvic cavity, the abdominal cavity, the left side of the thorax, the left side of the head and neck, as well as the left upper limb. So it's quite an important lymph vessel, the thoracic duct. And then equally of less significance actually because it's smaller, on the right side, you have what is known as the right lymphatic duct. So right lymphatic duct will only receive lymph from the from the right side of your head and neck, from your right upper limb, and from your thorax. And this will also drain similar in a mirror-like fashion to the thoracic duct, where your right internal jugular and your right subclavian vein meets is where it will into it. Okay, so all of this in purple is going to be drained by the right lymphatic duct. The area on the left here was going to be drained by the thoracic duct. Okay, you can see cisterna chyli begins in the abdomen, and then the thoracic duct will begin and will make its way up and eventually drain into the left side at the junction between the left subclavian vein and left internal jugular vein. Okay, any question?
No, doctor.
No, doctor. Okay, sorry. No. So that's all for your introductory to security system. I will give you some time because I think 1 hour is a lot of information to process. Maybe we'll meet again at is half hour enough of a break?
Sufficient, doctor. Thank you very much.
Sufficient, yeah? Okay, so I'll see you back at 12 o'clock for your vertebral column lecture.
Okay,
Okay,
doctor.
Assalamualaikum and thank you very much.
Thank you, doctor.